weekend advertisements in the newspaper. So the Sun, I think we advertised on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and the province has a Sunday paper, if I recall. And we ran ads on Wednesday and Sunday in the province. Now, we're paying a large premium for the weekend advertisements because the circulations are higher, right? The Saturday and Sunday editions of the Sun and Province are more expensive because they have higher readership. More people buy, some people just buy the weekend edition. So I thought, well, let me start with a thing where I'm paying a lot more money for. Let me stop advertising on the Saturday and Sunday editions and just see what happens to my traffic. My traffic was always kind of high on Sundays and Mondays, and I just presumed that was because of the weekend advertisements that lined up in time. Interestingly enough, when I stopped paying money on the weekend versions, I didn't see any drop off in web traffic. Okay, and so I'm thinking, why am I paying like $3,000 for an ad when it's not having an impact? Now, I didn't want to run the experiment just once, but I turned it on and off several times. So I run several weeks of ads, right? Stop it, and then in the other newspaper, I turn it on and turn it off, and I realized my web traffic's not sensitive to this. And so I then changed the experiment. I put the weekend back on, and I dropped the week advertisements. And then I saw a drop in traffic. And then I was like, wow, I'm surprised, because I thought the weekend traffic was, like the Sunday, Monday traffic was being driven by weekend editions, but in fact, the ads that were running on Tuesdays and Wednesdays were actually showing a relationship with that. And I would not have known if I had not turned the campaign on and off. So since then, I haven't run any weekend advertising, because it seemed to not have a very good return on investment. But that was basically me trying to get a more quantifiable measure. So I was still running campaigns, but I was basically moving from plan to measure and adjust. Once I had better quantifiability, then I could change some things like, okay, I'm no longer going to run weekend editions, but I'm going to stick with the weeks. Okay. So the dead end's not good, but you should be motivated toward how do I get better measurement. And sometimes you just have to get thoughtful about that and figure out how you can run the experiment. Okay. Now, it was a little bit more effort to run the experiment, and I had to change one thing at a time, so it slowed me down in my marketing execution, that I couldn't be doing multiple things at once. But if I'd never run that experiment, here I am years later, I would still be wasting a lot of thousands of dollars on weekend advertising. Okay. So let's talk about the naive optimist quadrant. If you're there, what would you be motivated to do? What's that?
Continue.
You're just going to continue there. And so the naive optimist is actually the worst quadrant to be in. Because you're exactly that. You're naive, and yet you're optimistic that whatever you're doing is working. So 2 years from now, you're still there. You're doing the same thing because you think it's working. You presume it's working. But you don't have quantifiable metrics. And so I worked for an organization that would not allow me to live in the naive optimist quadrant. There'd be enough oversight there where they just say, like, what are you doing? And, maybe it is working, but if you can't quantify it, then we're not going to allow you to believe it is. And they basically said, if you don't have evidence that something's working, you should assume that it's not. Because it's a lot safer to be dead end than naive optimist, because at least the dead end person's going to move to one of the quantifiable. So the people that are in the naive optimist quadrant essentially live there the whole career, and they're wasting a shitload of money because they don't have any evidence of what they're doing to live. So that's not, I don't want any of you kind of to be stuck there. Right? But a lot of you, until I learned this, I was like, wow, I've been a naive optimist, before, and it wasn't until I worked in that organization that I basically said, I'm not talking really an operator. Okay.
Is the only way to test a layered campaign to stop and start, like the various layers within that campaign? Is that the only way to do it?
It's not the only way, but it's the cleanest way.
What's the other?
You can modify it, but again, like if you don't have a basis of measurement, you're in the dark.
I mean, if you're able to track it better, like with landing pages and other things, and you don't let it spill into the other campaign, then you're okay.
I mean, what Amazon and others are doing is they're running experiments on their website every day. So what you may not realize is that, and the thing is, they have the traffic, they can get away with it, right? So you have 10,000 people visiting the site. They will siphon off a group into a test site, it's random, okay? And so they call this A/B testing. But you basically have, I don't know what the sample size is, but let's say you had 500 people here and 500 people here, and all they've done is manipulate the price or the photograph or where the information is on the page. And they're basically looking at how many people bought, what was the percentage that bought here versus here, right? And then they have their main site over here, which the vast majority of people are saying, but they're always suffering off and running experiments in real time. And as long as this is random assignments, like we don't really know who is, but we randomly, every fifth person that comes in gets assigned here, here, here. When we look at these percentages, right, because it was random assignment, the only thing that can explain the difference here is the fact that we manipulated something. So we run controlled experiments, but you can only change one variable at a time. Okay. So if you're dealing with, your own business and you don't have that type of volume, then the experiments take longer to run because you need, maybe 5 or 10 observations before you know what's going on. But the beauty of being in a B2B Salesforce situation is your Salesforce is your experiment. Right? You can go to one client and manipulate your approach, and the other people you're dealing with don't know that you're doing it differently than this one client because you deal with each of them directly. So you could be experimenting with your Salesforce every single day. Right? So does that make sense? Then that's the discipline here. And most organizations don't have the discipline. They don't. I think the vast majority of marketing people actually live here. So a lot of us do what we do because our competition does it. And you're like, well, they do it, so it must work. Well, based upon that mentality, your competition thinks that what you're doing it because it works. And you're like, we don't know. So if you don't know, the good chances is your competition doesn't know either. And the fun thing for me in my career, having worked with a lot of different organizations, is most of them are naive optimists because they don't have the discipline to question why they think it's easy. So basically, just presume that everything you do fails unless you have evidence that it's working. In that case, you're thinking everything you're doing is failing unless you have evidence. Don't be optimistic. There's no benefit. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's what we call the kind of the product. So what can we do about it? Well, one thing is to start by mapping your process. So in like 1994, I was an undergraduate, 3/4 way through my degree, and I worked for a company called the Laurie Institute, which was essentially the executive education group of Wolf Laurie University. So they're like Sauder Exec Ed. They go in and they try to develop learning programs, and so they compete with like Deloitte & Touche and McKinsey and the big consulting firms, as well as the other universities. And the idea is, we'll come into your organization, we'll try to understand your problem, we'll write up a proposal, we'll find a faculty expert who is matched to your problem, and they'll come in and do tailored training. So rather than sending all your people to like a set program that's going to run for X number of days, we'll actually design a program just for the people in the organization. So imagine like you guys are benefiting from what we do in this program, but what if you had your entire management team together in the same thing? It'd be really beneficial because you wouldn't have to try and go convince them of what you're learning has value. Everybody in the organization would be on the same page in terms of what we should be doing. So these custom programs are really expensive, but the organizations get huge, huge value out of them because everybody in the organization is learning, and you don't cover anything that isn't directly relevant. So if you're going to spend, say, $60,000 on that type of program, but the company can send like all 20 or 30 of its people, the cost per person is really cheap, and you know what you're paying for this type of program. The cost per person gets spread over 23 people. It's actually a really good deal for the organization to spend $60,000. And the university much makes more money going in and maybe doing like a 4 or 5 day program for $60,000 than trying to have a bunch of people do like $1,000 course and only really get 20 people across much different companies. So this was the marketing collateral that I developed as a student for them. What they've been doing at the time was saying, we can do a program in change management, we can do a program in finance, we can do a program in marketing for you. But if every program is different, you don't really have a good exemplar of showing them what you train them on. And so I thought to myself, it doesn't really make sense that you guys are trying to sell these guys on what you can teach them. What you should be selling is your process of how you would go in, listen to them, but they wouldn't pay any money whatsoever until they were satisfied with the learning curriculum and the program was exactly what they needed. And then only if they agree to that and we deliver the program do they have to pay for it. So the school basically eat all the upfront costs of spending time doing the meetings with the company back and forth, to really understand the problem, find the expert, have them develop a proposal, and only then when it really looks like, yeah, this is exactly what we want, then we go ahead and do it. And I think most organizations would think that, well, the moment you meet with me, the meter is running, and I got to pay the school. We're like, no, it's not like that. And it was clear to me that most organizations were surprised at the fact that we could have many, many meetings at no cost to them whatsoever except for time to try to win that business. So I put this together, and that is, our approach first is to listen to you. And I think, who knows if they read all this, but we begin by meeting with you to listen to your needs and identify your objectives. And then next we develop, right? We respond by developing an outline of a tailored in-house program that focuses specifically on your objectives. We then seek feedback from you to ensure the program fits with your organization's needs and objectives. And when you're satisfied, we move forward to deliver the program. And then we deliver that in a time frame, structure, and location that best suits your needs. Right? So you don't have to pay anything up front. And so we kind of talked about our mission, our experience, and our clients. And so we're actually marketing our process instead of trying to give you examples of education. Because what we do for one company is not at all like what we do for another company. So I thought the whole approach of how they were trying to sell their services just didn't make sense, and this was my proposal. So that was kind of on the front. And then what I spent the summer doing for the Laurie Institute was essentially mapping their sales funnel and looking at conversion rates at each stage. And this is not hard to do, and this is what I strongly advocate that you guys do. I'll walk you through the example of what I did for them. Okay. So first off, you need to identify the sequence activities that occur. And the nice thing about time is it's linear, and sometimes there's multiple things going on at once, but you can try to figure out, okay, what are the various steps? So before I got involved, the status quo approach was that we would use business directories and our alumni network for contacts. So we would actually we would look at chambers of commerce business directories to figure out what are all the firms over 500 people, say Kitchener-Waterloo, Mississauga, Toronto, etc. We then had our alumni database as well. What people do we know in what organizations? But we relied heavily on direct mail. So we would actually send the direct mail piece was literally an 8.5 by 11 folded in half, and it was 8 pages of this thing. Each page talking about a functional area of business, such as marketing, accounting, whatever. And then on the back was this tear-off sheet, and remember fax machines? It was a fax response. They'd be like, here's our issue, basically in a nutshell. They'd fax it to us, and that would be the lead generation. And it would be my job to then follow up with a phone call and contact them like, hey, thanks for reaching out to us. Would you like to set up a meeting? Okay. So we contact them with the so the first thing is we get the business directories, then we do the direct mail piece. Okay. We wait for a response, and then either fax or phone us. And then I would then call the contact back to set up a needs meeting. Okay. So out of those phone calls, I was tracking. I literally didn't have an Excel file. I used every time I make a phone call, right, it would be a tick, right? The next tick, next tick, next tick. It's a brand new freaking marker. That's brutal. Quality control. Okay, and I would just measure it. And so out of those phone calls, right, 20% of the time they would agree to set up a meeting. 80% of the time they would say, just provide me with more info. And out of that, 80% of the time, nothing ever happened. Okay? So I'm beginning to track very early in the funnel. Okay? Of the times that we had the meeting, so the 20% of times that we took a meeting, 60% of those meetings resulted in us being asked to write out a proposal. 10% of the time, they would just say, follow up with more info. And 30% of the time, there was never an outcome. It was just a dead end. Okay? So the next thing we look at is what resources are being employed by the firm in each of these stages. So I was basically a summer internship. They paid me peanuts. So it was very low cost for me to do all the phone call follow-ups. I was using an information system called Symantec by, ACT, so our CRM software at that point was called ACT, A-C-T. It was, by Symantec was the software company. This is before Salesforce or any of these other things existed. And it was also my job to clean up the database. So there was notes in there and, times we phone call people. And so I was really just doing a lot of data entry and just cleaning up the CRM system. But the meetings, what would happen is we would set either a 60-minute or 90-minute meeting, and we had 3 people in the company that would go and do the meeting. One of them was my mentor. His name was Doug Bolger. Doug was about 5 years older than I was, so at this point he was in his late 20s. And Doug was a phenomenal person. He was young, but he was super bright, and he was extremely good with people. This guy would just be a chameleon, and he would just kind of change his behavior based upon who he was meeting with. So if he was talking with a marketing person who was like really intense and using her hands, he would mimic that and have these great conversations. Dealing with someone else a little more laid back, a little bit more cerebral, like he would change his behavior, right? And it got to the point where I really questioned my friends, like, wow, is he really my friend, or is he just playing me the whole time? It actually, I shared with him years later, it really rattled my friendship with him a little bit to see him, because I would go along in meetings with him. But the thing was, you can then look at this success rate in terms of are we asked to write a proposal or send more info or end contact. This is aggregated across all 3 salespeople. I have it for each individual, separated out. So I know Doug's meet to proposal conversion rate versus end contact versus send more info. And I knew it for the other 2 people. And it became clear that Doug was incredibly good at getting them to the proposal stage. His actual rate was more like 75%, and the other 2 people one was like at 40, the other one at 50. Doug took the most meetings, he had a really high conversion rate. What that revealed to me is, I don't know what the others are doing in the meeting, but Doug is really good at this, and the other ones are not able to move. Now, it could be law of small numbers, but over enough opportunities to have meetings, there shouldn't be big differences in their outcomes, right? Because everybody's got opportunity. So why is Doug fundamentally better? So one of the things that I suggested from this is that the other 2 start shadowing Doug on the meetings. Basically like, look, you're performing, this is where it can be a little bit hard for people to see it, but like, sorry, but your success rate is not the same as someone else in the organization. So you don't measure up. And you can't argue that, well, you just have always the hardest accounts, hardest meetings. It's kind of random who takes what, right? So when you measure, no one can really hide because the data shows the result. Now, you want to be supportive of everything, saying, we're not going to come down on you, but we'd like you to go in and observe the person who has the highest success rate and see if you can learn from their approach, and also debrief with them after the meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So the resources here is we're living in Waterloo, Ontario. So if you got to go to a meeting in Toronto, you got at least an hour drive from Waterloo to Toronto. Then you've got the meeting time, which is 60 to 90 minutes. And then if you're smart and you stack your bookings and you're just going to do Mississauga in one day and Toronto another day, at best you're going to get 3 meetings a day. So here's where you have a bit of an issue. In a lot of organizations, there's incentives for the lead generators to just get the ball to the next stage of the process. Do whatever you can to get a meeting. Do whatever you can to get a meeting. But when you think about it, the fact that 40% of these meetings were essentially dead end was a massive waste of the resources. Because if Doug is in one meeting, he can't be in another meeting. So I flipped it and said, rather than just try to get any meeting I can, what can we learn from the 40% that don't end up in a proposal? What is it about those clients, or what is it about the meetings that take place with those clients that we can learn from that we would know earlier on that I could qualify